Good morning to all who have joined this webinar this Monday morning. We're so excited to have you for this topic of higher education as part of Boise State's series Conviction and Conversation in Contested Times. I'm Andrew Finstu, and I'm the Dean of the Honors College, and I'll serve as the moderator for this morning's conversation. Before we begin, I have a couple of little housekeeping announcements. We've prepared a few questions in advance of this discussion, as well as gathered a number of questions from registrants of the audience today. And we recognize that comments and questions may flow during the conversation. We'll do our best to incorporate as much as possible, but I do want to note that the volume of advanced questions was significant, and we want to ensure that we ask those before we're able to move to real-time questions. I'll also note that many of the themes overlapped from advanced questions with some of the questions that we had prepared, and so we should have a representative and robust conversation this morning, and we look forward to it. The webinar is being recorded and will be hosted at boisestate.edu for future reference, where you can also find the 3 prior conversations we've hosted as a part of this series. I also want to recognize President Trump, who launched this series of conversations last fall to encourage and model balanced conversations on complex issues. And last month, if you recall, as part of our discussion with healthcare workers, we paused and really acknowledged the work that so many in our healthcare community have done. And I would like to do the same for our educators from colleges and universities throughout the state, throughout the nation, and of course our K through 12 educators as well. Anyone who's a teacher has been working tirelessly on behalf of all students. It reminds me a little bit of the impact of my own teachers, and one in particular. When I was in elementary school, I used to be a pretty nervous kid, and I would fake sick. I would fake sick at school because I was so nervous about that whole enterprise. And my elementary school teacher, this was in 2nd grade, she would let me sit next to her while we ate lunch to calm me down. And as I reflected on that this morning, I thought we are in a moment where most definitely teachers have sat next to their students, sometimes literally and sometimes on the neighboring Zoom box. And all of us share in the gratitude for that tremendous work, the tremendous work of our teachers. And today, the Conviction and Conversation series finds us sitting together of a sort with higher education leaders who are dedicated to advancing the education of all students, while recognizing and respecting that there are differing viewpoints about the nature and direction of higher education. We know this is on the minds of many, where education is headed, including higher education. And we know those themes cluster around issues of access and affordability and employability, as well as diversity. So I want to say thank you in advance to our distinguished panelists, and I'll briefly introduce each of them now. Ms. Debbie Critchfield is president of the State Board of Education, Idaho State Board of Education to be precise. She's called Idaho home for 28 years, where she's been a member of Idaho's State Board of Education for 7 years. She's served in a variety of educational capacities, including trustee and chairman for the Cassia County School Board for over 10 years. She works part-time for the same school district as their communications director and special projects coordinator. We're pleased to have President Debbie Critchfield with us this morning. Mr. Kurt Liebich, who's a colleague of President Critchfield's on the Idaho State Board of Education. He's the chairman and CEO of Boise-based Red Built and New Wood Resources. Both companies are part of the Atlas Holdings private equity portfolio. Prior to his current leadership role, Kurt served on the executive management team for the Weyerhaeuser Corporation, one of the world's largest integrated forest product companies. Kurt graduated with a BA in economics from Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine, and received an MBA in general management from Harvard University. He serves on the board of Red Built, New Wood Resources, H.D. Fowler, Hubert Engineered Wood, and Hayden Beverage Company. He's also served on the boards of numerous educational not-for-profits, including Idaho Business for Education, Project Lead the Way, Riverstone International School, and the Lee Pesky Center. Thank you, Mr. Liebich, for being with us this morning. Representative Barbara Ehardt, a member of the Idaho Legislature's House Education Committee, is with us as well. She is serving in her 4th legislative session. She has served on the House Education Committee for all 4 years. and is chairman of the Energy, Environment, and Technology Committee. Representative Ehardt comes to the legislature with a unique background. After playing basketball at Idaho State, she then spent 15 years coaching Division I women's basketball at 4 fantastic institutions. I think there's a little something going on with basketball these days. I think so. College athletics and basketball. She has a rare experience of getting kids into the university, through the university, and finally to graduation in that role as a women's basketball coach. She also taught classes at both University of California, Santa Barbara and Brigham Young University. Thank you, Representative Ehardt, for your time with us this morning. President Sonny Ramaswamy is the president of Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities. Dr. Ramaswamy comes to us from a number of universities and organizations where he has oversight. And specifically as president of Northwest Commission on Colleges, that includes accrediting institutions in Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, Oregon, Utah, Washington, and British Columbia, and then of course, Boise State University in the state of Idaho. Dr. Ramaswamy was appointed by President Barack Obama for a 6-year term as director of the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, which catalyzes transformative discoveries in support of food and agricultural systems. He served previously as Dean of Oregon State's College of Agricultural Sciences, Director of Purdue's Agricultural Research Programs, University Distinguished Professor and Head of Kansas State's Entomology Department, and Professor of Entomology at Mississippi State. And President Ramaswamy, I think Idaho has something to do with agriculture as well. So you're in good company here. His degrees are a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture and a Master's of Science in Entomology from the University of Agricultural Sciences, Bangalore, India, and his PhD in entomology is from Rutgers University in the state of New Jersey. So thank you all for being here. It's wonderful to begin this conversation around higher education across all these different roles that each of you play in the higher education world. And we're going to start with a question precisely as to why you're interested and dedicated and have worked in education. What motivates you to do so? And Representative Ehardt, I'd like to start with you.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys for allowing me to be part of this. Thank you, Andrew, and to everyone else who's joining us. I do have a most unique background, having spent so much of my time in a most unique role, which very few people have the opportunity to do, which is, as you had stated, getting kids in, through, and out of higher education. You know, I have a love of kids, always have. I feel most comfortable with kids. And so that's certainly one of the motivating factors. I've been blessed with an ability to teach. I've been blessed by the coaches and teachers who have been in my life, and certainly something I wanted to continue doing. You know, as is a truism, both for the legislature, for basketball, for whatever we do, nobody really cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that's where one of my strengths is, you know, getting to know, understand, and truly caring about people, particularly our youth. And so that has been one of the motivating factors. But let me share with you another motivating factor when it comes to education. I am a firm believer in this country. I'm a firm believer in our Constitution and what it took to lay this Constitution down. It is the oldest surviving Constitution in the world. And there's a reason for that. And when you look at what our founders expected to happen with this Constitution, I want that to continue to be taught to our young people. I want our young people to know and to love and to understand why they are blessed to live in this great country. Do we have flaws? Absolutely, we have flaws, but those flaws are not so harsh that we can't not overcome them, especially through love and love of one another. And just keep this in mind, when it comes to the Constitution, our founders wanted 3 things when they put this Constitution together. They wanted to have for everyone, they wanted, as they looked at all the other countries and the problems they had, they saw that there was war. They wanted us to have peace. They wanted us to have prosperity, and they wanted us to have freedom. And those are 3 key elements that I want to see continue. And the only way we're going to continue is to make sure that our youth and our higher education kids are taught this. They're not taught the antithesis of this, but they are taught this. And so that's one of the driving forces for me as we move forward in education.
Well, thank you. And all panelists, I should have noted, agreed graciously for first name basis. So thank you, Barbara. And I'll move to Debbie for a response on what motivates you to serve in higher education as you do, especially in your leadership role at the State Board of Education.
I think if I were to put it in one phrase, I would say it's about connecting students with the art of the possible. It is so satisfying to me when I speak with students, whether they're a freshman that's just left high school or an adult who wants to come back or finish or start because they believe that there's more attainment for them, whether it's professionally or personally. And when I consider all of the options and all of the opportunities that Idahoans have with our institutions within our system, it really is so thrilling to me. And if I'm going to fault something about our system, it would be that we don't cheerlead and we don't celebrate the great things that we do in ways that help our students understand what they can participate in. And just recently, I was in an elevator with a young man who we struck up a conversation, and he told me that he, in fact, was coming to visit BSU's campus as part of a college tour. And he was a senior, and he was coming from out of state. And we visited about that. And then it produces those questions. Well, what are you interested in? How do you see your future? And what do you want to be a part of? And when we take the excitement that comes with being a part of something greater than ourselves and going to university and considering all the things that Representative Ehardt talked about, how we connect those to the students is really the most exciting part to me of being a board of trustee member.
Thank you very much, Debbie. And Sonny, we heard from your biography that you've worked at a number of institutions across the United States and now serving in this role to accredit institutions across the Northwest. Could you say a little bit about your motivation in higher education and what it is that has brought you to this place?
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew, for having me here on this panel. And I'm truly honored to be with the distinguished other panelists as well. And to tip of my hat to President Marlene Trump as well for organizing these kinds of conversations. So the motivation for me has been really about helping address the human condition. Education helps us, help individuals get out of the morass of poverty and other things that they may be in as well, to help their human condition. And, things that we do, all of us do, and we heard Barbara talk about it as well from her own background as well, is our own backgrounds, what drives us, what motivates us, and things like that. And, I grew up in India, very, very modest circumstances, I'd say very poor, and a single parent. And my mother had an 8th grade education. My dad had a high school education. And and my dad died when I was a 9-year-old boy. And so my mom raised us with her 8th grade education. And her admonition to us was that education was going to get us out of that morass of poverty that we're in. And it was that human condition. And I was privileged to have interacted with and worked with a number of great individuals, great Americans, Norman Borlaug. Some of you may have heard of Norman Borlaug. And I had the privilege of coming to America later on as well. And I've been the beneficiary of investments by the United States, both in India and here in the United States as well, in the what we refer to as the land grant universities, like the University of Idaho and others, Washington State University and others as well. And again, the premise of the land grant universities that got started here in America, very uniquely an American invention, is to help address the human condition. And that's what it's all about for me.
Thank you very much, Sonny. Kurt, what are your thoughts on your motivation and service to higher education?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I guess I came at it from through a business lens. When I got out of school, I went into manufacturing, and what I saw pretty early on in my career is that a lot of the manufacturing jobs were changing. It used to be that in this country you could graduate from high school, go to work for Ford Motor Company or in the forest products industry and earn a middle-class lifestyle. And with automation and all the changes that are going on in business, what I saw is just not enough of our kids were going into STEM-related disciplines. And so that was my first involvement and started learning about the education system and getting involved with the education system. And I think those trends that were there in the 90s are only accelerating today. If you look at where industry is going, and for us here in Idaho, having a dynamic, strong higher ed system is absolutely critical to sustaining the growth in our economy. And we're one of the fastest growing economies in the country, and we're going to need a higher ed system that can support that.
Thank you very much. And Kurt, I'm going to stay with you here on the second question, because what I've heard from all four of you is tying education to, I really appreciate, Debbie, your phrase, the art of the possible, prosperity from you, Representative Ehardt, Barbara, Sonny, talking about advancing the human condition. And of course, Kurt, your comments just around growth in the economy and possibility around how do we continue the momentum from a business perspective. And I'm wondering if each of you could speak briefly on what the difference maker was for you in terms of possibility. You've spoken to this somewhat, Sonny, but in terms of possibility personally tied to education, was it a teacher, a course, a cumulative set of experiences that brought you to the positions you're in, where you're speaking about the ways in which education motivates and moves possibility and prosperity? Kurt, could you start us off there, please?
Yes, I mean, and I think you commented this, Andrew, with how important that teacher was to you in elementary school. You know, I was blessed in both high school and in college and graduate school to just have at least one teacher that was just a tremendous mentor. And actually, the reason I even ended up in Idaho was that the gentleman who taught me manufacturing at Harvard, a guy by the name of Steve Wheelwright, was on the board of this company at Trust Choice here in Boise. And it was him who really said, "Hey, Kurt, I don't know if you want to live in this great state of Idaho, but if you do, there's this unbelievable company out there." And that's how my path, 30 years ago, got me to Boise. But again, it comes back to just, I think it's really important that every student, regardless of where you are in your educational career, seeks out a mentor that can help guide them and direct them.
Thank you. And Barbara, what was the difference maker for you as you came up through education? Person, a course, what was it?
Well, it'll probably surprise no one that the difference maker for me happened to be my coaches. You know, when you're playing collegiately, you spend, over 3,600 hours engaged in that athletic related activity. And so the people with whom you're constantly associated are your coaches. And, Clayton Christensen, Innovative Disruption, Harvard Business Law, actually talked about this even in the point of those who will continue to donate to universities are those who have been touched most often by a teacher or a coach. And so, it was through athletics that I learned so many things, including conflict resolution and, how to deal with that. Obviously, many other things such as cooperation there. So for me, it absolutely was athletics and the opportunity to share ideas. And then oftentimes, even in the classroom, being an athlete wasn't always necessarily an advantage, and you found that you had to justify some of why maybe you should be able to be excused from class or a few other things. And so I found that highly valuable to my future as I was able to engage in those conversations with both teachers, but it was my coaches. They made a huge difference.
Thank you. And Sonny, you spoke briefly to this already in the way in which education made a difference for your family, but maybe there's a little more specific encounter or moment where it helped you think about moving forward and advancing, as you said, your condition and then your interest in the human condition overall.
Yeah, well, yeah, indeed. So I referred to the name of a gentleman, Norman Borlaug, Borlaug. If you get a chance to, and the listeners, if they get a chance to, just Google that name and you'll see. He is said to have fed 1 billion people, including yours truly. And so I was, as in the introduction, you talked about my having a background in agriculture and land-grant universities. And Norm Borlaug, I had the privilege of meeting him back in 1970, and he was the hunger fighter. And hunger at a fundamental level is a human condition. Poverty at a fundamental level is a human condition. And education helps us address those conditions that we've got as well. And Norm was a huge influence on me. And then when I had the privilege to come to America and study at Rutgers, and then, in your introduction, you talked about my having been at multiple institutions. I've traveled to every state of the union, and certainly I've traveled all over the world as well as part of my responsibilities, and seen the human condition across the globe, whether it's about food and hunger or education and things like that. And in every one of those situations has been somebody that held our hands and walked us across, every one of us. And Barbara eloquently referred to it as well, those coaches that she had. They hold your hand and walk you across, point you in the right direction, and point you the kinds of things, the obstacles that may come across. And oh, by the way, they also help deal with some of those obstacles as well. So I think that's a critically important part. And I think, in education itself, that mentoring and that advising and things like that, I hope we can talk a little bit more about that, are critically important aspects of how we help our students be successful in achieving the goals that they have set for themselves.
Excellent. Thank you, Sonny. And Debbie, what was a difference maker for you in your educational journey?
I'll join the chorus of singing the praises of the power of people. And I think I was one of those rare college freshmen that knew the course of study. I declared my major day one, never changed it until I graduated. And as I had an interest in government and political science and those areas, I was so grateful and blessed to have individuals come and help me understand this is a passion, these are things that you're interested in. How do we translate that into meaningful job opportunities and meaningful experiences? And I think for every student, it's so critical that we help them see how they can take their interest, their passion, their dedication, and make that into something or create something that gives back, that allows people an opportunity to serve, and that is also fulfilling to them personally.
Thank you. And Debbie, I'm going to stay with you and then and go to Kurt next to help us unpack. Now we're moving into, we've all spoken, every single one of you, eloquently about the value of education, the value of those people, to use your phrase, Debbie, that impacted us in so many ways as we move forward, each of us in our own educational process. And now it's about governance of education. And we've got this wonderful constellation of folks representing different ways in which we govern higher education. And so, Debbie, as president of the state board, and then Kurt as a member of the state board, I'd like you to reflect a little bit on your role in the governance of higher education in the state of Idaho. And then, Sonny, I'll turn to you from the Northwest Commission, and then Barbara, to you from the state legislature perspective, because I think it's really important for all of us to understand, in some sense, the three entities represented here that help us shape the governance of education, knowing that we all value education. So Debbie, I'll start with you and then move to Kurt.
When I was a local board member, and as you mentioned earlier in my bio, I served as a trustee for 10 years. I was frustrated at that level that there were things that I felt were roadblocks or barriers to decisions that I wanted to make locally. And I would say to myself, where is that place where you can do and be and have the conversations and not feel as though someone is saying, no, stop, you can't do that, or there's a rule that says you can't do those things. And so as I got to the state level, certainly it's not a free for all, but there's definitely an ability to maneuver within initiatives, policies, et cetera. So then I had to swing to the other side and say, I don't want to put myself or position the board or have it be in a position where other people are frustrated with what's happening at a different level. And so I saw both sides or on two ends of the same line. And part of, I think, the role of the state board is to get out of the way. And we want to set proper guidelines. I think leadership is key. If there are things that we want universities or local school districts, and as a reminder, we are a board for K-20, postgraduate medical education. And so when we think about where we want to influence certain points on that line, what conversations need to take place, and again, where do we remove ourselves and let that innovation and let those things naturally take place. The other role that I see, in addition to getting out of the way and clearly providing the right kind of leadership, is allowing the conversations to take place at our level, that we can synthesize all of the information and say, here are things that we think make sense. How do we then help support those decisions? And working with an 8-member board, a wide variety of experience, interests, backgrounds, expertise, there really is a strength in the board in that context, that we're able to have these conversations, elevate some of the conversations, and again, provide some leadership in a way that doesn't feel as though we're poking our fingers into everything. And then really quick, lastly, I also see our role as and me personally as president, facilitating conversations between the legislature, between the citizens of Idaho. What exactly does our board do and can we do? There's some things we can't do. How do we then help address the issues, the concerns, the problems that others have in the educational world and work that through to the outcomes and to the finish lines that we want to get to?
Excellent. Thank you. Kurt, could you build from there in your role as a state board member as well?
Sure, I agree with everything President Critchfield just said. I mean, I've viewed it that there are three things we really need to do. The first is set the vision and the strategy for our higher ed institutions. And, for us, and the rallying cry across the state is we want, we've heard about that 60% goal. The view is that we think that 60% of our kids and students need to pursue some sort of post-secondary degree, whether it's a 4-year degree, 2-year degree, certificate, but there needs to be 60% of our students need to have that credential to be aligned with the workforce. So that's sort of a high level goal. The second thing is, and Debbie talked about this, we've got to just hire great presidents and then stay out of the way. The key to this whole, in any institution, whether it's a university, school district, it's all about leadership. So we try to hire great leaders, hold them accountable to a set of goals, and then get out of the way. And then Debbie mentioned this, but I think it's so critical. It's so important that we build alignment with the legislature. The citizens of Idaho elect our representatives, and we as a board really need to be talking with the legislature, understanding what their vision is, and making sure we're aligned. Because ultimately, it's the legislature that's the bank. I mean, our education system is funded by our legislature. And if we don't have alignment in that area, then we're just pulling in different directions. And some of the things that I think have been really powerful happened before I was on the state board. But things like the Advanced Opportunities programs, which gives high school kids opportunities to get credit. That's funded by the legislature. It's had a huge impact. Those are the types of things where when you have alignment with our elected officials, we can do some really meaningful things across the system.
Excellent. Thank you. Sonny, I want to zoom out for a minute before we zoom back into Idaho with Barbara, but zooming out to your role as president of the Northwest Commission, can you talk a little bit about what that body does, how it relates to these entities of governance? It's really helpful, I think, for folks to understand the Northwest Commission on colleges and universities and its role.
Yeah, thanks so much, Andrew. Our authority comes to us from the federal government, and very specifically, there's the Higher Education Act that Congress passed several years ago, and it needs to be reauthorized. It hadn't happened yet, but that's where it derives from. That is interpreted by the United States Department of Education into what we refer to as regulations. And those regulations are provided to us, and we interpret those regulations and translate those into what we refer to as standards for accreditation, eligibility requirements, and policies. So we apply that in the context of the institution. And I came on board just about 3 years ago, and we went through this process of review and revision of our standards and requirements and other things. It was an iterative process that went across, not just within the region itself, the Northwest region itself. We held town hall conversations and other things in every state within our region, but also nationally as well, sought input from people, not unlike some of the folks that are gathered here as well. And used all of that to revise our standards. And we went from a very top-down prescriptive approach to a bottom-up supportive approach. And so we just have two standards. The first standard is about students, and the second standard is about compliance. And we really focused on that very first standard. As a matter of fact, the vision that we articulated for the Northwest Commission is to promote student success and close equity gaps. That's our bottom line. We focus laser-like on students. And because student success is critically important. If we look at America and you look at Idaho state institutions as well, and Debbie and Kurt probably have a lot more of the data for the institutions there, we've got a significant number of students that come into our colleges that are, in quotes, left on the table. That is, they don't graduate, and in some reasonable amount of time as well. And so that's something that we all need to be very concerned about. That's a lot of money that's being invested. By the way, the United States of America, taxpayer dollars, it's around $150 billion a year that is provided to our institutions across America. And when you add state investments from donors and others, et cetera, all of this brought together, it is well over $1 trillion that goes into this enterprise. So we have the role as accreditors to hold institutions accountable, institutions like Boise State University. And again, we apply these standards and requirements and things like that in the context of the governance structures, the compliance aspects, et cetera, finances. Do you have appropriate financial controls and things like that? How does the board relate to the institution? These are the things that we look at as well. But the bottom line for us is students. It is about student success, and that's what we focus on.
Thank you, Sonny. And Barbara, you've got experience both personally as in higher education, but also as part of the legislature's House Education Committee. So please talk to us about that role.
Well, first, if I could, one of the things that I've really appreciated, especially the last 3 years, is Debbie. She has been incredibly responsive, and I'll tell you what, there are times I'll give her a call and I don't get her, and I get an immediate text, "Hey, let me call you back in 30 minutes." And that's just incredibly helpful when you're trying to work your way through a myriad of causes and things that seem to pop up. I spend hours and hours and hours on education. So I suppose you can say that ultimately what our role is, we make laws, propose laws, and appropriate money, to sum it up. But of course, it's so much more than that. I spend a lot of time listening. I spend a lot of time reading the emails and, trying to follow that which is occurring, especially at higher ed, having a different perspective because of my previous experience at being in higher ed for 15 years. Some of these deep conversations that we find ourselves in, especially over the last few years, is leading to conversations such as this, because we as legislators represent the people. And so we are their stopgap. We are their only means to help facilitate, and I shouldn't say only means, but we're one of their main means to help facilitate change. And we feel like there needs to be change because the direction that higher education is going is a complete cultural shift from that which we've had. And we look back at the last 10 or 15 years, and I've been reading through a lot of things, and I hope we have an opportunity, especially having such distinguished people here, including Sonny, to be able to ask and find out some of these questions and just the direction we're going. I found it interesting. Yes, I do believe that, certainly one of the positions and responsibilities that the Northwest Accreditation has is to hold institutions accountable to a certain extent. But really, the people who hold the institutions accountable are your elected leaders, your elected officials. We feel that is our job and our role, and it's something that at the legislature we take incredibly serious, and will continue to have those conversations to try to help our kids and our people. And whether that has to do with the curricula that is being taught or the cost of education and the constant rise, those are all things that we feel as elected officials, and me, including being on the House Education, that those are responsibilities and roles that I have. And just as a thought here, I'm just going to start throwing some of this stuff out because I know we'll get to it. But just so again, where our concern is, or where my concern is, and I'm not the only one here, but kind of looking at some of the things that Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida has said lately, when it comes to some of this critical race, social justice, we're teaching our kids to hate each other and that our country isn't worth it. And this is, we're literally teaching the demise of our own country. And this is where I really, I'm trying to find a path forward, because I take it from that basketball, coaching context. I coach kids from all walks. I mean, it didn't matter if it was from rural or inner city, if it was rich, poor, if it was, black, white, Muslim, Christian, Mormon, gay, straight. We had everybody on our team. And if we had tried to divide those kids up into their categories, it was a sure recipe for disaster. When our teams work, what made it work is because we were able to bring everyone together to learn from one another. And so it kind of goes back to one of the things that I've been saying throughout, is that You cannot unite by dividing, and you cannot be inclusive by segregating. And so for us at the legislature, we want to see Boise State united as one team. And it can be the blue team with that blue turf, but one team. That is our goal as we move forward. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. So thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, well, I think I want to come back to that. There's sort of the next two questions are around exactly these issues, Barbara. Thanks for raising them. And actually, maybe I'll flip them based on your comments, because the two major themes that have just come out: student success. I've heard everyone speak about student success. I've heard Kurt's reference specifically the 60% goal. I've heard Sonny talk about laser focused on promoting student success and graduation, and your comments also connected to that, Barbara. And I'm wondering if we can think about this notion of the ideas that are informing our students in higher education. And I want to step back and ask us to maybe reflect on the e pluribus unum motto of the country. And that is to say, we have that, literally translated as out of many one. And so that relates to your theme of unity, Barbara. But also, I think we know at some level that the one is dependent on the many. So that relationship between the many and the one, I think would be interesting at this moment to reflect on from each of your roles in governance and from your experiences in thinking about student success. Because as you spoke so first-handly about, I don't even think that's a word, you spoke about your coaching experience, Barbara, the differences in your teammates and how you had to bring them together. But my sense is you had to understand their differences as you brought them together, and then vice versa. So I'd like us to jump on that theme. And Sonny, I'd like to start with you, and then Barbara, I'll just come right back to you, and then to Kurt, and then to Debbie on this notion of how we balance the many and the one, which seems so critical right now, both nationally, as we know, and in higher education specifically. So Sonny, please.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. And I think that's a critically important thing to consider as well, that e pluribus unum, and there's a wonderful way of articulating what we're talking about is there is strength in the many that we've got that we need to capitalize on as well. And, the old adage about chain is only as strong as the weakest link is critically important to think of as well. And when we think of the demographic changes that have taken place in the United States of America here in the last several years, and even prior to that, we've got, if you do not disaggregate data and find out exactly what's going on, then we're not going to be able to make the progress that we need to make. We know, and every state of the union, including Idaho, there are significant differences in the achievements of students that come from different backgrounds. And I don't use these terms, diversity, equity, and things like that, just kind of throw it around. My preference is to use the term students that come from underserved communities. They may be students of color, they may be students that are white, that come from rural communities, that come from schools that are not as fancy as some of the big schools in larger cities like Boise and other places as well. But every one of the students, our goal has to be is if they aspire to want to get an education, we've got to work very hard to make sure that they're achieving those as well. And then we know that there are some students that require a little bit more in terms of the support that they need as well. And so our focus really, the approach that we've taken, in applying not just the federal laws, but we also apply whatever the state laws are and end up being as well. We work very closely with Debbie's organization as well in interpreting the kinds of things that are going on in the state of Idaho, and we apply it in that context. And we're really deeply interested in making sure that every student, regardless of what their background is, that they're given not special money or special assistance or whatever, but they're given the mentoring and the advising and the hand-holding that we all talked about previously as well to be able to achieve their goals. And that's the approach that we take. And it's not to pit one against the other. That's never the approach that we've taken previously, nor do we take that sort of an approach that we're going to go ahead and focus on Blacks or Native Americans or Hispanics at the expense of white students. That's not the approach that we take. It is every student that comes from an underserved community, we're going to make sure that we need to be supporting that.
Thank you, Sonny. Appreciate those comments. And Barbara, of course, wanted to come back to you. You brought us to this point of how we balance those, as Sonny so nicely put it, those who may, for one reason or another, need that extra hand or mentoring from various communities, while we also pursue that notion of success for all students. So please share a little more from your perspective on this theme.
Well, that which was just shared by Sonny, I don't think any of us would have a difficult time with that. If that is the direction that we were going, I absolutely can appreciate that, Sonny. Thank you. You know, as we know that there's more going on than just that, but let me just hit on a couple of thoughts that I have here. Before on Sonny's previous question, he made a good point. Sonny, sorry, you make a lot of good points, but he made a good point when he is talking about leaving some of our students out there when they don't graduate, and why, and the amount of money that it costs. One of the things that I would like to see, and I think we need to see, is unfortunately, and I'm not talking necessarily in Idaho, but higher education is big business. And it's big business, including how the government has decided to attach its federal dollars and have taken over the loans and things like that. So higher ed is big business. And one of the things that we're missing is we need to do a better job of making sure that our first year students are going to the appropriate universities. And by that, what I mean is that oftentimes a community college would be a much better means of education for some of our students who are struggling, rather than jumping headfirst into, say, Boise State. We have 4 fantastic community college located throughout Idaho, and those need to be utilized more by some of our students who may be struggling. That's one thing we can do to help with that. When I look at some of the other things, I don't know if you realize, but one of the things that's been said lately is diversity is the most powerful word in education today. It is used, and has meanings, many of which we've assigned ourselves as to what that means. But no other word has so much authority, and other words, and words that I've used and want to reference, have kind of gone by the wayside, and that would be words such as excellence. You know, the idea of achieving excellence for all is incredibly important to me, that should be the overriding theme in what we're trying to achieve. And so along that way in achieving excellence, I am completely for making sure that students from underserved communities are served, but I want to make sure it's for all, for everyone. Because if that's our focus, all students, you know, then I'm good. And that programs and our academia, our professors are teaching that way, that we don't have side motivations and inherent ideas on what should be taught to the students, and that somehow one particular race is bad. White race. There's nothing inherently wrong with the fact that I'm white, nor any of our students who are. And I want to get away from teaching that. I want to be able to teach about that, as President Critchfield started out saying, the possibilities. Education is there for all of us, and the possibility and opportunity to go in and achieve, to become the best you can. If that's the goal of all of our educators together, then I am for that, and that's what I want to see. There needs to be value, an implicit value in diversity of experience, diversity of thought, deductive reasoning. These are all incredibly important points of diversity. And so when we make diversity only about immutable characteristics, we're missing the point. So I want to make sure that diversity is inclusive to all. And when we can do that and make everyone feel included, that's ultimately my goal. That's what sports are all about. So anyway, I'm sure we'll have another opportunity to address it, and I probably should allow our other 2 panels then their opportunity to express their thoughts.
Well, thank you, Barbara. You touched on, of course, the theme of diversity, and diversity of institutions was also a comment. And Kurt, that reminds me of some of your notions about the 60% goal and how that might be deployed. So anyway, any comments from you on the notion of, you know, out of many, one many, what kinds of institutions might support our students, again, with that bottom line of, it seems that everyone on this call, of course, is concerned with the success of our students.
Yeah, I mean, I think we live in a really fractured time politically right now, and one of the concerns I have across the broader higher ed landscape is we don't seem to be willing on many campuses to have the conversations that we should be having, and really debating issues and the issues of the day. And you know, I'm concerned in certain areas where speakers are not allowed to speak who might have different points of view, or students are shunned or not accepted because they have different points of view. To me, our campuses in Idaho need to be places where the issues of the day can be debated in a respectful way. And And I think if we can create a climate where that exists, then you can bring, if people are talking about these issues, even if they're disagreeing, they'll come together. And then the other thing I believe is that we really need to teach our students to give back. You know, I went to Bowdoin College and they always talked about the common good. I think if we can teach all of our young adults to give back to the communities they live in, that can bring us together as well. But again, our role, I think, at the state board is just to ensure that our campuses are supporting that rich dialogue and allowing these difficult conversations to happen. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Kurt. And Debbie, also same theme here. What you've got a chance to think about the comments of your fellow panelists on this issue of diversity of students, diversity of voices. Interested in your thoughts.
I think one of the biggest travesties that I would mark in the state is for any individual to feel as though they can't see themselves in a university setting, or whatever the options are, whether it's a technical school, a 2-year, 4-year, wherever that is, that for all of the reasons that have been discussed, we want to create an environment where people can see themselves taking advantage of the opportunities. It comes back to that access piece. But in order to access, you have to feel as though you can see yourself doing those things. And we don't want to put anything in place, whether it's a policy or an atmosphere that keeps someone from feeling like they can't take advantage of making themselves successful for the future. And that's going to look differently for everyone, depending on where you are, where your resources are, what your expectations are. But there is a place for that. And we want to continue to encourage a culture where people feel comfortable to be themselves and to pursue those things. I've had the great privilege of taking I have 4 children, all 4 of them, dropping them off, so to speak, on their first day of their college freshman year. And, you know, there's a wide variety of advice that parents give their kids, but the one thing that I always left my children with was, don't let the fear of something keep you from doing it. And so there's so many opportunities, and there's so many experiences and people and things to know and learn and to understand. And don't be afraid because of a system or because of something that someone says or because of your own insecurities to try and do and be and all of those things. And if we can create that type of culture on our campuses where people feel empowered, they're going to be successful. And then those problems of retention and graduation, they're not going to be problems because we're there to help support the individual.
Well, and Debbie, I think the last comment there around retention and graduation, because we know, and Sonny, I want to come back to you on this. We know, and you mentioned this in your remarks, that the underserved groups you talked about graduate and retain differently. And so I think you had a few follow-on comments here related to that theme.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, very quickly, I wanted to get back to what Barbara was referring to as well. That is the focus on excellence. And Barbara, I can tell you that the approach that we're using is very much of an outcomes-driven approach, i.e. excellence. When I talk about student success and closing equity gaps, that's what I'm talking about. It is about that commitment that our institutions must make. We must make a society about talking about the human condition, that every individual that comes to our institutions is given the opportunity to be able to achieve. And, you know, as a basketball coach as well, you did exactly the same kind of thing as well. So when we think of, you know, there's a value proposition in focusing on student success and closing equity gaps. And for me, that value proposition comes from a handful of issues. Number one is social cost. What is the cost to society if we were not to be able to focus on making sure that every student is afforded that opportunity to excel in everything that they do? Social cost. The second one is the opportunity cost. That is, more broadly writ, the loss of potential gain from other alternatives when one alternative is chosen. So it's not that, going back to what Kurt was referring to as well, it's not this against that. We don't want to be pitting one against the other, but it's an all-inclusive approach that we want to use as well. And then certainly these, you know, these terms that we use about justice and fairness and equity and things like that. And really it is to afford all people. That's the approach that we want to use. And so when we think of the statistics, data and the data-driven approaches, and that's the other thing about the Northwest Commission is we're very much about using data and evidence to look at that the institutions are actually moving the needle, and we hold our institutions accountable based on that. And so if you look at broadly read at the United States of America, data that comes to us from the what we refer to as iPads. This is the post-secondary educational database systems that we've got. And in this particular case, it ranges from about 40% among students that come from a tribal background or they're African Americans, on up to about 55%. This is a 6-year graduation rate, by the way, 55% for students of Hispanic descent, on up to about 65% for students that are Caucasian, and then Asian students, they perform at a significantly higher level. About 75% of the students, they graduate in 6 years. Now, when you look at Boise State University, and it's also its own peers as well. Boise State has several institutions that it uses at peers, and so you look at what I refer to as students coming from underserved communities and non-underserved communities. So Pell eligibility is an excellent marker of these underserved communities. And because they tend to be poor, they come from rural communities, as well as they come from, they may be students of color, et cetera. And so when you look at that, retention from freshman to sophomore levels at Boise State University, there's only 2 points difference between those two groups of individual students. So about 76% of the students from underserved communities, they retain into the second year, and about 78% of the students from non-underserved communities, they go on into the second year. And then when you look at 6-year graduation rates, so students that come from non-underserved communities, they're graduating at about 56%. And then the students that come from underserved communities are graduating at a tad bit over 50%. Much better than other states in the nation, by the way. And yet Boise State has some ways to go to get to where it needs to be. However, the trend lines, when you look at the data, are really excellent. They're headed in the right direction. And Boise State compares very favorably with many of its peer institutions as well. One of the things that we're trying to do is to help institutions like Boise State and University of Idaho and the community colleges as well that Barbara referred to, help them find these comparators and compare themselves against those comparators, and then set aspirational goals to get to a higher and higher level of that excellence that Barbara refers to as well. That's our intent. We want to push our institutions to be able to excel at what they do in the context of where they are. So we honor the mission. Idaho also has, for example, Brigham Young University, Idaho. Right? It's a faith-based institution. And then you've got a publicly supported institution like University of Idaho. We got to honor each of those missions. We apply the same approach in every one of these institutions. And we try to help our institutions get to a better spot as we go forward as well. So the way I say it is accreditation is it's not just a destination, but it's a journey to get to that excellence that Barbara is referring to.
Well, and Barbara, I'll give you a last word on this theme of excellence and outcomes that Sonny has developed. But I want to come back to Debbie and Kurt from the state board perspective, because I think your focus is also singularly on, we want our students to graduate, and we want them to graduate from multiple different institutions. So talk to us a little bit about the board's approach to this notion that Sonny's raised about how we see those students close those opportunity close that in on that opportunity gap or social gap from your perspective, Debbie, and then Kurt.
The discussion and understanding of individual characteristics of each of our institutions within a larger system has been a conversation piece since I joined the board nearly 7 years ago. And it's not one that, well, I'll say it's unique to Idaho with our governance system. We don't have to go and try to work with individual boards to achieve the same goals that the Board of Education wants to reach. We have a strategic goal as a board, and we recently changed our mission, our vision, and our value statements to reflect who our priority person is in this whole system, and it's the student. We want a student-centered system. And within that system, we appreciate that there are other cogs that are moving, and we all want to move in that same direction. And Kurt referred to this earlier about having those strategic goals. And then how do we we want the unique flavor of each of our institutions, because that becomes attractive to every kind of student in Idaho. So we're not trying to make everybody the same, but we recognize that access, affordability, retention, and graduation are those guiding principles that we have an expectation that all of our institutions are going that way. Now, how they achieve those and how they get them, it is interesting to watch and observe. And as Kurt pointed out, as our board, we evaluate that progress, and we evaluate according to standards that we have as a board. How close are you getting? Are we veering off in this direction? We've got to refocus. And I know I'm not getting exactly to the heart of your question, because I don't know how to answer that specifically from this perspective, but I will say that everything that we do is designed to encourage a student to recognize the options that Idaho has. How do you access them in the most affordable ways? How do we help you achieve your own personal goals so that you feel that you are prepared to go take advantage of the economic opportunities in Idaho?
I think it's because the question wasn't very well phrased, Debbie. I think you got right to it. Excellence and outcomes across a diverse range of institutions is what I heard from you. And Kurt, I wonder if you could pick up on that. And you mentioned the 60% goal, and I'm not sure if, because I think it ties directly to this notion of excellence and outcomes. And I'm not, maybe you could familiarize our audience with that a little bit. You did briefly, but to think through that in the context of excellence and outcomes here.
Yeah, and this goal predated my time on the board, but I think it was Governor Otter. There was some work done. It's been done on a national level that basically looked at, all right, so where's the workforce going, and what skills do our students need to have to align with that workforce? And the 60% goal basically is an attainment goal. It basically says, look, if you want to be ready for the jobs that are emerging in the future, 60% of our kids are going to need to have some sort of post-secondary degree. It doesn't mean it has to be a 4-year degree. It can be a 2-year degree from a community college, it could be a 4-year degree, it could be a 6-year degree, or it could be a CTE certificate. I mean, there are a lot of jobs out there where if you get the right CTE certificate, you can earn a middle-class wage coming right out of school. So that 60% goal is an attainment goal, and what we're focused on, and let me say this, the way we're measuring it today is it's a population goal. So we're actually looking at its population in Idaho, and that the board's had a lot of conversation about whether that's the right goal, because it's hard to hold our institutions accountable for a population goal. So we're probably going to, I would think, over time move that to actually a production goal out of each of our institutions. So, what are we actually producing? Because that's something they can actually control. But to that end, it's all about access and affordability to achieve that goal. We have to get kids into the system. And I agree with Barbara. I mean, I think too many, when people heard the 60% goal, they thought we were saying that every kid needs to go on to a 4-year school. And that's not at all what we're saying. We're saying that there's different career pathways for kids. For some kids, it means CTE programs and getting a certificate. For some kids, it's doing what Barbara said, getting a 2-year degree and then saying, well, and maybe then they go on to a 4-year degree at one of our 4 institutions. But there's so many different pathways. And I think one of the problems we've had nationally, you hear all this conversation nationally about how we need to forgive student debt. Well, the problem is too many students went on to higher ed not thinking about a return on investment. So they loaded themselves up with debt, didn't think about how they were ever going to pay it back. And we got to do a better job educating our kids on, you really need, when you go on after high school, you really need to think about sort of what the return on investment and tied closely to that is on-time graduation rates. If you're not getting through the system on time, you're just magnifying that problem. And so I think this, reaches back even into the high schools. We as a system need to do a better job of talking to our kids about the different pathways, about the implications of one versus the other. And I think if we spent more time in our high schools, we'd end up with better outcomes in our higher ed institutions.
Thank you, Kurt. And I'd like to come back to the theme of cost and decisions about higher education funding and so on. But Barbara, I promised you another word here on overall this theme that we've talked about: excellence, outcomes. How do we manage how do we work with the many, as you did in your athletic career, toward the whole? You've been loud and clear about the whole. But I also know a little bit, we got to visit before this with your ability to probably motivate and mobilize students, as you said yourself, athletes, from different backgrounds toward that whole. So another chance for you to think about excellence for all, but also noting that I'm sure you motivated your athletes differently to reach that excellence. So how do we, in some ways, athletics could be a model for how we're thinking about looking at students differently from different backgrounds, as we've discussed here, toward that whole. So I wanted to give you the last word on this particular theme.
No, thanks, Andrew, and we'll see if I can hit on that. But let me just say some fantastic points really made by the three panelists before me, and I just really appreciate that. You know, as Debbie had said, you know, how do we achieve our personal goals? And, you know, if you're to take that to an athletic standpoint, when an athlete comes in, their first personal goal is they wanted to play collegiately, and you know, so often they want to be able to find time on the floor, and it just slowly stair steps up into more. They made the team, now they want to find playing time, then they want to increase their playing time, they want to start, they want to, you know, star. It kind of goes like that. And so those are all things that we as their coaches, as their mentors, are helping them do. But I think when it comes to our students, you know, and Kurt had an excellent point, that our students are trying to get in. Most often in the beginning, they're trying to get in and get an education and get out, and then we get held up along the way. And whether it's not having enough information on the way in, not having a clear idea of where it is they want to end up as they're going through, I understand that. That's all part of it. But one thing that still hits at the concerns of those whom I represent, which would be my fellow legislators, is during this process, and I agree with everything that's been said, but during this process, as we are trying to focus on the one, is focusing on the one a matter of literally helping them, or is it a matter of an agenda? When I say an agenda, I still go back to having concerns about what it really means when we talk about diversity, inclusion, equity, social justice, any of that, because I see throughout the United States, certainly not just in Idaho, certainly not just at Boise, but we see a common theme being promulgated throughout classes, not just a certain class, but throughout classes of kids being subjected to these critical race theories. That's the part that I would like to see taken back. I mean, if as an athlete, if we made all of our kids have to study how, I don't know, Duke ran their offense and everything they did throughout the day, yet we're not going to use any of it, would there be value? I suppose there could be value. This is a stretch on an analogy, but we need to get to the point of what education is about. The purpose of higher education is to get our kids in, help to give them the information that they need to be able to get out and get productive in their life. We are not to prolong that, and we don't need to add to that. There are certainly opportunities for them to find niches if they want, but that should not be something required within the context of their education. Anyway, I'm kind of all over the place here, but let me also just say this. I don't know what the statistics were for 2020. It was kind of a lost year, but I do know in 2019, when we looked at the overall graduation rates of the US, they were at 65%. And in Idaho, we were not achieving that. And so all of this is my point really for all of our kids. I think Boise State was at 44% graduation. So what does that tell me? It tells me that all of our kids need that extra help and direction in helping them to achieve graduation. All of our kids are important. And actually, literally, all of our kids are important to me, every one of them.
Well, thank you for that. Go ahead, Sonny, go ahead.
I just wanted to add just a tad bit, I wanted to pick up on what Barbara was referring to as well. Number one, the only agenda that we push, Barbara, I can guarantee you this, and I talked with my counterparts at the other commissions as well, is one of success, student success, and that excellence that you and I spoke to as well. That's the agenda that we've got, number one. Number two, I think, there's also some, I don't know, I've not seen any data that's a generalized data that you seem to, you stated actually, that there is some sort of a critical race theory type thing that's being pervasive all over America in every course and things like that. I've not seen that per se. And again, we don't push this idea. It's all about diversity. It's all about inclusion and equity and things like that. It's only about Black kids or African American kids or Hispanic kids. What we push is all students. Every student that comes to our institutions needs to be given the opportunity to be able to graduate. And I think the statistics speak loudly that you spoke to, which is Idaho is, sorry to say this, not performing at the level that the rest of the country is performing as well. So there's something that needs to be, looked at. Why is that happening? Are there students from particular backgrounds that are affected more, so that pulls down the overall graduation rates? And are they coming from rural communities? Are they coming from poorly prepared schools? And going back to what Kurt was referring to as well, we got to go reach back into the high schools themselves to help bring the students up to speed. So having those disaggregated data becomes a really significant powerful approach to be able to address these sorts of disparities that we're seeing. And I think overall graduation rates, they're headed in the right direction, but they can be heading even in a better manner as well.
Thank you, Sonny. And I want to turn to, and Kurt, you raised this. So we've got this theme of success and excellence for all students that has also been spoken loud and clear by each of you. And I want to return to, you had referred to the return on investment question, Kurt, and that's often how the public is now framing. I think the public at large, not just this group, about what does it mean to have higher education. And I think people define it in the terms that you offered. It's about employment opportunities. It's about the cost of higher education, the student debt that comes along with that. And I'm wondering if we could reflect a little bit about the nature of cost of higher education, but also funding of higher education to support students. Because my sense is, and Sonny and also those of you on the state board or Barbara may have this notion that financial barriers are probably the most significant barrier to student success. So if we could pivot a little bit toward the notion of cost, but also funding. And Kurt, since I used you to help frame it, I'll go right to you, and then Debbie, and then Barbara, and then Sonny.
Well, I think we're close to the breaking point in terms of the cost of higher ed, if we're not already there. And I think to the extent we at the federal government are going to forgive all these loans, that tells me we're already past the breaking point. If in terms of what it costs for higher ed. And look, higher ed is the only industry, and I think Barbara said was a huge industry. It's the only industry I know that, at least from when I got out of college, there's basically been a tuition increase of 3 to 5% across the board in higher ed for the last 30 years. And it's become sort of an arms race in many cases, where you need you need the new football stadium, you need the new gym, you feel like you need to have the best of everything. And I joke with my kids when I visited them at college. I say, look, you guys have the nicest living arrangements and gym that you'll probably have in your lifetime. Like I didn't live in an apartment like this until I was 35 years old, and that just can't go on. And we're going to have to really look at the cost of higher ed. And I think President Critchfield's provided great leadership, and we're going 2 years here with no tuition increases in our institutions, which I think is a great first step. We're making investments in, I don't know how many of you have heard of Online Idaho, where we're creating a portal where we're going to be able to deliver online all the offerings across the state to any kid, no matter where they are. I mean, all of those things that we're working on are trying to get at this cost issue. But I'm convinced we just have to improve the affordability of higher ed, not just in Idaho, but across the country.
Debbie, I think I said I'd come to you next. And I think we also think, not just specifically Idaho, though, I mean, there's also the question of funding. So we know the cost, Kurt, you've outlined it really well, but also the question of funding, because we know nationally states have cut back in the same period that those increases are also happening. When you look at those two curves, they're going in opposite directions, state funding and also cost of higher ed. It's not an excuse, it's just also part of the question. Cost and funding. Debbie, please.
The burden on our students for tuition, we can't keep that pace. We know that. We're looking at where we've been historically, and if we're marking that trajectory, we will outprice every single student, not only in Idaho but nationally. we have got to look at how we address our funding models differently in higher education. And were it not for the pandemic, our board was prepared to have a new funding formula model for the legislature's review and consideration this session. But because of the interruptions that we all faced, and we were all in survival mode this past year, that work had to pause. And so as we've picked that back up, we're focusing on, and I can't remember now who addressed it, if not everybody at some point, on outcomes. What is it that we want? We're looking at degree attainment, we're looking at recruiting, we're looking at retention, all of those things. We're aware that the students who carry the highest amount of student debt are students who don't complete. So what do we need to do in the process? I mean, I can't think of, I mean, there's a lot of crazy things that happen in college, but to get so invested emotionally, academically, financially, and then have to, for a variety of reasons, stop out. And things happen in life, but because of affordability issues or not having proper mentoring or counseling, those things are fixable things. I mean, we can't fix life problems that happen to people, but we can fix things within our system. And so as our board considers how we develop a model that is, well, right now we've got three ways that that universities get their money: from the student tuition and fees, from the legislature, and then through federal grants and other things. And we can't control the federal government. Fine. We can, we do have an influence over the contribution that our students make, and that needs to be proportional and it needs to be affordable. We don't control the legislature. We're not elected as lawmakers, but we can develop the relationships and create a plane of understanding to say, this isn't sustainable. And we all recognize that. How do we fix this in a way that honors the work that needs to take place, covers the costs, and helps students be able to get to their personal goals. And as I mentioned just a minute or so ago, we're prepared, or will be prepared, to have something to the Idaho legislature in January of 2022 that will outline what we believe is a more sustainable way that focuses on outcomes rather than inputs.
Thank you. And Barbara, as you mentioned earlier in your remarks, part of your responsibility as a member of the legislature is the appropriation of funds. So you're in a position to speak about this from that perspective around cost and also funding. So please.
No, thank you. Absolutely. And honestly, if more than Kirk and Debbie will know, we appreciate their leadership and their willingness to get involved. We really do. And again, I know I've spoken with Debbie more than Kirk, but Kirk, just know that it's appreciated. I appreciate your words too. When we as a legislature look at things, so often it's driven by the data and the numbers, which comes from our legislative services and Boise State, and of course the other higher ed institutions. And so there's some numbers that are troubling. And I know that Kurt and Debbie at some point have seen them. And so we're trying to reconcile what we're seeing and how this fits into higher education. And some of these numbers, now I'm looking through 2019. I admit I don't have the updated numbers. It's been a unique situation we've all just gone through, so I don't even know that we have them. But BSU's enrollment in the last 13 years really had only grown by just over 1% a year, or 16%. But during that same time period, the spending more than doubled, from 250 million to over 500 million. Faculty increased by over 40%. The faculty. Managerial professionals had doubled. And, the executive administration is up over 52%. So you're looking at these numbers based on the student growth, and we say, why? So in our mind's eye, there are means to cut. Even just recently, as employees had been furloughed, and then we end up hiring people specifically for, and I'm going to probably get the exact title wrong, so forgive me, but hiring staff for this, diversity, equity, inclusion, critical race. And it's just beyond us as legislators why that would take place when this is, a point of concern. So we look at these things, and this is where we're troubled. This is where we have to reconcile the numbers and the direction we're headed. And this is why the conversations with Debbie and the board are so critically important, because sometimes there are reasons. And it helps us then to understand. Let me also throw something out. I had thrown his name out earlier, and he's a fascinating individual, and that's Clayton Christensen, who had passed away recently, but the Harvard Business School professor he was the one who came up with that disruptive innovation. But in 2017, as he was talking, he made an incredibly chilling prophetic, I guess you would say, maybe it wasn't so hard to believe, but he said that within 10 to 15 years, and he really backed it up to 9 years, he said 50% of our colleges and universities would be bankrupt. And he didn't even know we were going to have a pandemic. He said 50% would be bankrupt. So I suggest to all of us, and I don't literally mean us here, because I know Debbie and Kurt are very much involved and understand this, but we have to change. We have to do things differently, and we have to find a way to not be investing this kind of money, because literally some would call that bloat. And then, what's also interesting is when I jump over, and I did spend, Sonny, some time on the Northwest Accreditation's website, and also found that incredibly interesting. As you go to your homepage and look across, of course, one of your key drop-down tabs was, equity. And it's just, again, it brings me back to what is it we're doing as this talks about making sure that the practitioners are willing to take personal and institutional responsibility for the success of their students. That's great, but it says that we are literally in the process of, with equity, that we're literally in the process of transforming, and that word transformational is used multiple times. And then there are like 20 different areas to click on that take you to hundreds of pages. And this is where I'm saying, wait, everyone, let's get back to the basics. We know that we're facing a financial problem. We know that universities all across the country will be facing bankruptcy. Let's get back to the basics that got us here in the first place. Let's get our kids in, get them a good education with subject matter and degrees that are actually going to get them a job, not some of the degrees. Let's eliminate some of these degrees that mean nothing, and let's get them on track to get a job and to be productive and to leave with minimal debt, and hopefully with the direction that will keep them employed and happy.
Well, and I'd like to give Sonny a chance to respond, because he was up next anyway, to think about, you can zoom us out, Sonny, and think nationally about education, some of the notions of hiring. And I think this might connect back to advisors. I know that there's been a significant expansion in hiring advisors to support students as they go through, especially from different backgrounds. And I think I would also, well, I just want to turn to you, Sonny, to comment on this question of cost, debt, return on investment, and where we started the conversation, the art of the possible and advancing the human condition, because I think we've zeroed in on finances and the cost structure as one of the challenges facing, significant challenges facing that art of the possible for our students.
Yeah, well, thanks, Andrew. And I think the very last statement that Barbara made, as she wrapped up what she said, and really the focus on making sure that every student that comes to our institutions gets the education, they graduate in a reasonable amount of time with the least amount of indebtedness. That's exactly what we're pushing, Barbara. I can guarantee you that. Okay, now the equity piece of it, absolutely, you and I collectively as Americans, we've got to be concerned about this. We've got a situation in America, looking at those graduation rates that you referred to, disaggregate the data, dig a little deeper into it. It's pitiful, the situation that we've got with students that come from poorly prepared institutions, white or black or brown or whatever, I don't care what race, gender, ethnicity, et cetera, they've got. But if they come from poorly prepared backgrounds, they're not going to do as well. And we've got to do everything we can to go ahead and fix it. And that's what, for me, that's the whole point about creating an inclusive environment is all about. That's what it's about when I say equity and things like that. It's not that we're going to somehow take this one group of individuals that are, brown or black or whatever, and then move dollars away from this other group to support them. No, that's not the approach that we're using. And I think, collectively, we're all going to benefit as a nation if we were to be focused on the idea that every individual has to. And I think, Barbara, you and I agree on that. That is, it is about excellence. And so going back to this at a broader level as well, I mean, you look at what, for example, Georgia State University has done. in thinking of the return on investment, making sure that the students are graduating on time, making sure that the students graduate with the least amount of indebtedness and things like that. There are examples that we've got, institutions across America that are doing fantastically well of working with students. Again, going back to the fundamentals, which is advising, making sure the courses are available, making sure that the instructors that are teaching the courses have those skills and knowledge and credentials and things like that. And there's a lot of hand-holding. Barbara, you and I talked about hand-holding is a really important part of it as well. I think that's where we see success. And if we were to focus on what I refer to as the fundamentals, we're going to be addressing what Kurt's referring to. That is, we got to make sure that we get this return on investment as well. And then sometimes, it reminds me of the old adage about the definition of insanity that Einstein, referred to as well. And we keep doing the same thing, and we're going to expect that something else is going to happen here, and we've got to have to, figure out how best to do it. I can tell you that we've heard a lot. When I say we, I'm talking about me as an accreditor and my cohort. We've heard a lot from multiple communities across this continuum of education, which is from the parents and alumni to legislators to the employers and such. And we're committed as an accrediting body to make sure that we're going to be part of this as well, to help provide the solutions that we desperately need. And it is, guarantee you, it is about the students.
Well, thank you all. I want to give each of you, if we can do this, we've got about 7 minutes, one comment each to kind of close us out here. Then I'll thank each of you. Maybe it's a comment you weren't able to insert, a question you wish had been asked. So Sonny, we just finished with you, so I'll start with you and then I'll go around the Zoom here. So any last comment on this wonderful conversation?
Yeah, I want to go back to what I started out with. It is about the human condition. That's the approach that we've taken. And I think we create these sort of false dichotomies. And I think really collectively we can do a lot of good if we're to bring our collective thinking to this, to address the issues of making sure that our students are going to be excelling at everything that they do as well. So how do we hold the institutions accountable? How do we make sure that the institutions have the kind of resources they need? All of these become a significant part of this effort as well. So I think collectively we can do a lot of good. And there is this move, this recognition that it's about time we did it, going back to what Kurt was referring to as well. So I want to stop there. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Barbara, then Kurt, then Debbie, you'll close us out from the panelist point of view. So go ahead, Barbara.
Well, first, thank you so much. And thank you to Kurt and Sonny and Debbie and you, Andrew, for doing this. And Dr. Trump, very, very much appreciated. I think the biggest thing that I would hope to leave with everyone is, especially from that coaching perspective, we were all about our team. Our team was as diverse could get, and we made it happen. Anything less would have been a recipe for disaster. And so I value all of our students, and that's the biggest thing. And I think Debbie may know that more than anyone else. That's the biggest thing that I want to see happen, is all of our students are protected in their opportunities to be able to get the best education possible, that our driving force is that of excellence. And if our driving force is that of excellence, I believe all other things will fall into place. So thank you. Thank you so much for having me be able to participate with you all in this.
Thank you, Barbara. Kurt.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And thanks all of my fellow panelists here. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And I guess I would just close by saying, some of my prior comments, you might think that I'm negative on higher ed. I'm actually really bullish on where our higher ed institutions are going to go here in Idaho. And part of that is because of this great place that we live. People are going to want to come to school here because Idaho is such a phenomenal place to live. And I think our governor and leadership have done a terrific job at stick handling through this pandemic. Our financial situation as a state is probably as good as just about any state in the union. Even though I spoke about the cost of higher ed, our institutions, when you look nationally, are very affordable. So if you're sitting in California, Seattle, and you look at University of Idaho, it's a very affordable place to go to school relative to other alternatives. So I have a mixed heart with how fast Idaho's growing, because it's harder and harder to find a good place to fish on the South Fork of the Boise. But we're going to continue to grow, and kids are going to want to come to school here. And we have work to do on-time graduation and those types of things within our institutions. But I'm actually pretty excited about where our higher ed education system can go in the state of Idaho. So thanks for including me in this conversation.
Excellent. Thank you, Kurt. Debbie.
Thank you. And I'll add my thanks and appreciation. Like the others, I've enjoyed the conversation, and education's been a passion of mine for over 20 years. And any opportunity I get to talk about it is always welcomed. As Barbara mentioned, she and I talk about this a lot. We're similar night owls. And so I won't tell you that sometimes that we talk to each other on the phone, but we're awake past 10. I'll let you know that. I know that this has been a series sponsored by BSU, but this is what I want to say from the board perspective on higher education and our interest in having students be successful. We're agnostic as to how a student achieves those goals. There is a way to accomplish personal goals and to feel personally accomplished in life. And if it's not at BSU, and those that, BSU folks, plug your ears, they're somewhere else, there's someplace else. And from our board perspective, as much as I emphasize how we want to get out of the way, we're also involved. We want to be a part of the problem solving. We want to be a part of the discussion. We want to be a part and be at the front of the line when it comes to how we develop this system in a way that allows students of any type from any place to see themselves being successful. And that means that we continue to cultivate and create new partnerships and relationships. We want to do that with the legislature. We've got to do it with our business industry. We've got to do it with our local communities, and the most important place is with our families and with our students, and how we help them understand what's available to them. And so when we look at education from the State Board of Education perspective, we're there to encourage and promote it in every single form that fits the needs and meets the needs of Idahoans.
Thank you all so much. It's been wonderful to have each of you give this much of your time. To my knowledge, we haven't gathered in this way, these three different parts of the governance for higher education, in particular related to Boise State, and it's been really informative to hear all your perspectives. I heard resoundingly clear an interest in students, and interest in students' learning, prosperity, opportunity, excellence. I heard listening, and I think we did that today, as well as conversation. And that's the sort of shared enterprise that we all need. I think we all know we need as we move forward to really hold on to those teachers and educators that sit next to their students, as I opened this conversation with. So thank you all for your time and your expertise and your willingness to engage one another on these very important and challenging issues. So it's exactly what we're up to here with this conviction, because all of you showed conviction. We had a conversation, and we are in some contested time. So thank you so much for being here. Much appreciated. And thanks to all of you who listened in to our panelists this morning.
Thank you very much.